What if the unthinkable happened? In the chaos of a Third World War, the Russian front, long considered unbreakable, finally collapses. Welcome to Tipping Point Files. In this documentary, we take you inside the first days and weeks after the fall, tracing the shockwaves that ripple from the battlefield to the Kremlin, and from Moscow to the rest of the world. This is not just a story of military defeat, but of a nation on the edge, a frantic scramble for power, and the global consequences when a superpower falls apart. Because when the front breaks, history is rewritten in real time. It began with a single breach. After months of brutal, grinding warfare, a coalition offensive finally shattered Russian defenses along a 200-mile stretch of the front. The initial reports were confused, then terrifying. Satellite images showed columns of tanks in full retreat, cities burning under relentless bombardment, and soldiers abandoning their posts, leaving behind billions of dollars of equipment. For years, the world had been told the Russian front was impenetrable, a meat grinder from which no enemy could emerge victorious. But in war, certainty is always the first casualty. As news of the collapse spread, panic gripped command centers from St. Petersburg to Vladivostok. The question was no longer if Russia could hold the line, but what would happen now that it had utterly failed. Within hours, military order gave way to absolute chaos. Russian units, cut off from supplies and leadership, began a desperate, disorganized retreat. Some commanders tried to regroup and form new defensive lines, but their efforts were futile against the momentum of the rout. Other units surrendered en masse, raising white flags over trenches they had held for months. Many soldiers simply vanished, melting into the dense forests and bombed out cities, their fate unknown. Civilians, caught in the devastating crossfire, fled by the thousands, creating a humanitarian crisis on a scale not seen in Europe for generations. The world watched in shock as live feeds from drones and embedded journalists showed abandoned armor, burning supply convoys, and the first signs of open mutiny among exhausted, demoralized troops. The collapse wasn't just military, it was psychological. The myth of Russian invincibility, cultivated for decades, had been shattered in a matter of days. As the front disintegrated, Moscow descended into a political crisis. The Kremlin scrambled to maintain a semblance of control, immediately declaring martial law and mobilizing every last reserve. But the chain of command, already strained by months of war, was broken. Conflicting orders were issued and then ignored. Inside the government's fortified bunkers, the atmosphere was toxic. Hardliners, furious at the humiliation, demanded a full-scale escalation, even hinting at the use of tactical nuclear weapons to stop the advance. Moderates, seeing the writing on the wall, desperately called for negotiation to salvage what was left. Rumors of a coup swirled through the capital as rival factions within the government, the military, and the intelligence services vied for power. On the streets of Moscow, protests erupted. Some crowds demanded peace at any price, while others, whipped into a nationalist frenzy, called for total war and the heads of the generals they blamed for the defeat. The world's largest country was suddenly leaderless, its future terrifyingly uncertain. With the front broken and Moscow in turmoil, the world's attention turned to the one thing that mattered most: Russia's vast nuclear arsenal. Would desperate leaders, cornered and facing oblivion, consider the unthinkable? Could a rogue general gain control of a launch silo? NATO and neighboring countries immediately raised their military alert levels to their highest state. Fleets put to sea, and bombers were scrambled, fearing a last resort strike or the catastrophic loss of control over nuclear sites. International mediators rushed to open secret back channels, hoping to de-escalate the situation and prevent a global apocalypse. Inside Russia, military commanders faced an impossible choice: obey orders from a fracturing government, hold their ground, retreat to protect the homeland, or escalate. The fate of millions hung precariously in the balance. For the first time since the darkest days of the Cold War, the world was closer to midnight than ever before. And while the generals and politicians debated, millions of civilians were trapped in the expanding chaos. Refugee columns stretched for miles along cratered highways, families carrying what little they could salvage from their ruined homes. Border nations, overwhelmed by the influx, struggled to provide aid. Some, fearing infiltration by desperate soldiers or the spread of instability, sealed their gates, creating desperate bottlenecks of human misery. Inside Russia, the situation grew darker. Reports began to surface of brutal reprisals against suspected traitors and deserters. Paramilitary groups, loyal to hardline factions, roamed the streets, hunting for scapegoats. Ethnic minorities and political dissidents, long oppressed by the regime, faced a new wave of persecution as the failing government sought to deflect blame for its catastrophic defeat. The collapse was not just a military disaster, it was a profound humanitarian tragedy. The fall of the Russian front sent seismic shockwaves across the entire globe. Strategic alliances, which had defined geopolitics for decades, were instantly re-evaluated. China, Europe, and the United States scrambled to understand the new reality and protect their interests. Some nations saw opportunity in Russia's weakness, moving to secure resources or territory. Others feared the spread of chaos and the specter of failed states armed with nuclear weapons. New alliances formed seemingly overnight as countries sought to fill the sudden power vacuum. The global economy went into freefall. Stock markets crashed, energy prices soared to unprecedented heights, and a wave of crippling cyberattacks surged across international networks. As rival powers jockeyed for any advantage in the new, unstable world, the global order, already fragile, was teetering on the brink of total collapse. With central authority gone, Russia itself began to fracture. Powerful regional leaders and oligarchs, who had long paid lip service to Moscow, started carving out their own fiefdoms. In resource-rich Siberia and the Far East, governors began to act like independent rulers. Some regions declared full autonomy, while others pledged loyalty to rival factions emerging in Moscow. Long-suppressed separatist movements flared up with new intensity in the Caucasus and other ethnic republics. The question on every analyst's lips was stark. Would Russia fragment into a collection of warring states, a Yugoslavia with nukes? Or could a new strongman emerge from the chaos to reunite the country, likely through even more bloodshed? The answer would not just shape Russia's future, but the fate of the entire Eurasian continent for generations to come. The collapse of the Russian front was more than a military defeat, it was a fundamental turning point in world history. It exposed the incredible fragility of centralized power, the extreme dangers of unchecked escalation, and the unpredictable, cascading consequences of global conflict. As the dust began to settle, the world faced a new and terrifying reality. Superpowers can fall. Borders, once thought permanent, can change overnight, and the decisions made in moments of extreme crisis can echo for decades, shaping a future we cannot yet imagine. The story of Russia's hypothetical collapse serves as both a warning and a lesson for all of us. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to Tipping Point Files for more in-depth documentaries on the critical moments that shape our world. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What do you think would happen if a superpower fell apart?